Okay, so we're diving into some tough news today, the
Mm.
passing of filmmaker Jeff Baena. We're going beyond just the headlines, though. We've got reports from the BBC and Carol 11 to start us off, really looking at his life, his films, and especially all those incredible collaborations with Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You look at Baina's career, and it's not like he was an overnight success. It wasn't one of those meteoric rises.
Mhm.
He started as a production assistant, learning from some major
Oh,
names.
yeah.
I mean, Robert Zemeckis, the guy behind Forrest Gump, David O. Russell, known for Silver Linings Playbook. Talk about a film school education.
Wow, so he's getting that experience firsthand before even directing his own stuff.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, did any of that early stuff show up in his later work? Like, can you see those influences?
That's the big question, right? You can try to draw those lines, but influence is tricky, it's subtle, it's not always obvious. Even his time at NYU Film School plays a role. I mean, we know his comedies like The Little Hours have this quirky, almost absurdist feel. But did anything from Zemeckis visually or O. Russell in terms of how he writes characters, did any of that seep in? It's something to keep in mind as we go deeper.
All right, so we've got this background,
Huh.
but we have to talk about the news, what brings us here. The reports say Baena was found at his home in Los Angeles Friday morning, pronounced dead right there. It is his assistant who found him, just an awful situation.
Awful.
And they haven't said what caused his death, not yet at least.
Yeah, and it's so important to let the family have their privacy during a time like this. It's got to be devastating for them, especially Aubrey Plaza, his wife. They work together so often. They actually met on the set of Life After Beth way back in 2014.
Oh,
That was his first film as a director. So that's where it all began for them, personally and professionally. And they just got married in 2021 after being together for, 12 years?
makes this loss even harder to think about. It's not just a director we're talking about. It's one half of this creative powerhouse. And they weren't making just any films either. They were getting noticed at big festivals, Sundance, the Edinburgh International Film Festival. He even had 9 nominations across all those screenings.
And that's where the whole indie label comes in. It's not just some style or a vibe. It's a whole different world, a whole system. Those festivals, they're looking for something different, a unique voice. And Baena, he had that. Whether he was working with Plaza or on his own, something about his films really clicked with those people, those taste makers.
Okay, so we've got a sense of his career overall, but what made his films stand out? Like, what was his thing? Was there something critics and fans always pointed to?
Well, to answer that, we really got to look at the films themselves. It's one thing to be quirky, but another to do it well, right? Take The Little Hours, for example, a period comedy set in the Middle Ages, but with a twist.
Okay.
It's not your typical historical piece. It's got this modern feel to it, tackles themes of sexuality and societal norms head on, plus you've got this all-star cast of comedic actors.
Wait, hold on. A medieval comedy dealing with those kinds of themes. That's not what you expect. Sounds like he wasn't afraid to take risks, even while trying to make people laugh.
Exactly. And I think that fearlessness is key here. It's there in his solo work, and it's definitely there in his collaborations with Plaza. Like, they found this perfect balance, sharp wit, but also genuine heart. And that is hard to do, especially in comedy.
So he's taking risks, finding that balance. How much of that was Baena himself, though, versus the Aubrey Plaza factor? Is that where we start digging into their creative partnership?
Before we jump into that, I think it's really important to look at what he did on his own. He directed films like Joshi and Spin Me Round without Plaza, and those got critical acclaim too. We need to understand what H.E. brought to the table before we start analyzing how their styles mixed.
You know what? You're right. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
So where do we begin with Baena's solo work? What were these films about, and how were they different from what he did with Plaza?
Well, let's start with Joshi. This one's a bit more grounded than The Little Hours, dealing with grief and male friendship.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a comedy, but there's this melancholic undercurrent that's quite striking, actually. This might be a good place to see how much depth he was capable of, even without Plaza by his side.
You know, what's really grabbing my attention is this idea of him tackling serious stuff within a comedy. It's not just silly jokes. There's actual emotional weight there.
Yeah.
Was that a common thing in his films?
That's a sharp observation. And yeah, it's definitely something we'll want to look at more closely as we go. He seemed to have this knack for finding humor in the darkest of places, which honestly takes a lot of skill as a filmmaker.
All right, so we've got this complex picture starting to emerge. This guy learns from the best, finds his own voice, and isn't afraid to get real, all while making us laugh. I'm hooked. Let's keep going with this.
So yeah, Josh Yanni really gives you a glimpse into what Baena could do. It's a melancholic comedy, right? You've got Thomas Middleditch, Adam Pally,
Yeah, yeah.
and it really showcases how he could handle those tough emotions, with sensitivity, but still keeping it funny.
Okay, so it wasn't just about crazy antics. He could get you laughing, but also make you feel something deeper. Did the critics pick up on that? Did Joshi do well?
Oh, absolutely. Critics loved Joshi. They praised how he balanced the humor and the more serious, the pathos. They talked about how real his characters felt, how relatable they were, even when dealing with some pretty tough stuff. It was a different direction from The Little Hours, less over the top, and it showed a maturity in his filmmaking that I think surprised some people.
So Joshi shows us he's got depth. What about his other solo film, Spin Me Round? Where does that fit into our understanding of Baena as a director?
Spin Me Round is interesting. It kind of goes back to that absurdist comedy we saw in The Little Hours, but with a more modern feel. It follows Alison Brie's character on this work retreat in Italy that goes totally off the rails. And it's hilarious, but it's also got this satirical edge. It pokes fun at corporate culture. And even the way Italy is often portrayed in movies, this overly romanticized image.
Wait, so he goes from this heartfelt bro comedy about grief to a satire set in Italy. Talk about range. Did these solo films affect his work with Aubrey Plaza at all, or were they totally separate things creatively?
That's what's so fascinating. It's like he was working different creative muscles with those solo projects, right? Honing his skills and then bringing all of that experience into the work he did with Plaza. Their collaborations feel like this fusion of his comedic instincts, that willingness to tackle bigger themes, and then her unique brand of deadpan humor.
Okay, so the collaborations weren't just some Baena Plaza formula. It was more of an evolution.
Yeah.
But what made their partnership so special? It's got to be more than just working with your spouse, right?
You're right. It goes way beyond that. There's this tangible energy in their work together. It's like they just get each other comedically. Their timing, their shared love for pushing boundaries, and that knack for creating characters that are both funny and strangely endearing.
I was starting to understand this secret sauce we mentioned earlier. It's like each of them brings something unique, but when they combine it, it becomes something else entirely, something you couldn't get without both of them.
Exactly. It's like they amplify each other's strength. Plaza's deadpan delivery fits perfectly with those crazy situations Baena creates. And his willingness to go deeper, to explore those heavier themes, gives her characters a chance to show some real vulnerability underneath all the comedy.
I think you've hit on something important. It's about more than just making people laugh. There's a real depth to their collaborations. It's like they're asking us to laugh at ourselves, at how absurd life can be, while also admitting that things are complicated, that the human experience is full of layers.
And that's so rare, especially in comedy. They created this world where laughter and reflection exist side by side, where you can be entertained and challenged at the same time. That, I think, is the mark of a truly successful creative partnership.
It makes you appreciate their films even more, knowing there's this intricate dance happening between their styles, this shared vision. But let's get specific. We've talked around some of their collaborations, like Life After Beth and The Little Hours. What are the defining elements of a Baena Plaza project? What should people pay attention to when they watch these films?
Well, first, listen to the dialogue. It's sharp, witty, and often delivered with that dry, deadpan tone that Plaza is known for. Then, pay attention to the characters. They're usually quirky, flawed, dealing with these relatable problems, even within the heightened reality of the film. And lastly, look for those moments of unexpected emotion, those scenes where the humor drops away and we see something deeper, something that stays with you.
It sounds like their films offer more than just laughs. There's depth, complexity that's worth digging into. And it makes you wonder, did critics recognize that? Did they get the same kind of praise as his solo work?
Oh, absolutely. Critics consistently loved their work together. They praised how original and witty the films were and how they balanced the humor with those genuine, heartfelt moments. Life After Beth in particular, people really love its fresh take on the zombie genre. And The Little Hours got acclaim for how it explored female sexuality and hypocrisy in society, and how it wasn't afraid to be bold about it.
It's amazing how they took these potentially controversial subjects, infused them with humor, and made them accessible, engaging for the audience. It really shows how fearless they were as filmmakers, how willing they were to push boundaries, challenge the norms.
Exactly. And I think that fearlessness comes from the trust they had in each other, in their shared vision. They knew they could navigate those tricky waters together. Their work wasn't afraid to be bold, to be different, to embrace the absurdity of it all.
It makes you think about how important it is to find the right creative partner, someone who shares your passion, your sense of humor, your willingness to take risks. Makes you wonder, are there other examples of successful creative duos like that? What can we learn from other partnerships that have thrived, whether it's in film, music, or even other art forms?
That's a great question, and one that we'll get into more in just a bit. But before we do, I think it's important to acknowledge what a huge loss this is for Aubrey Plaza and for the entire film community. Jeff Baena's voice, his vision, his unique sense of humor, it'll be deeply missed.
Absolutely. And as we mourn his passing, we can also celebrate the incredible body of work he left behind, a legacy that will continue to entertain, to inspire audiences for years to come. And on that note, let's take a moment to think about some other iconic creative duos throughout history. What are some partnerships that have stood the test of time, leaving their mark on art and entertainment?
Well, there are so many, but some that immediately come to mind are the Coen brothers. You know, those darkly comedic, visually stunning films like Fargo and The Big Lebowski.
Yeah, classic.
Then you've got Tim Burton and Johnny Depp, that iconic pairing. Their collaborations gave us some of the most imaginative, quirky films out there, like Edward Scissorhands and Sweeney Todd.
And let's not forget music. Think about John Lennon and Paul McCartney, songwriting partners. Their work revolutionized popular music with those innovative melodies and introspective lyrics. Or how about Jack and Meg White, the White Stripes, that blues rock power duo? Their minimalist approach, their raw energy, it captivated people worldwide.
Those are just a few, of course, but they all show how powerful creative synergy can be. That magic that happens when two people come together and make something truly special. It reminds us that collaboration, in all its forms, is essential to artistic expression, to how we push human creativity forward.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the life and work of Jeff Baena. We've explored his early influences, his solo films, his amazing partnership with Aubrey Plaza, and the impact he had on the world of independent cinema. But before we go, we want to leave you with one final thought to consider. You know, it's funny, going through someone's work like this with Jeff Baena, it makes you think about creativity, all the different forms it takes. It's not just about what you end up with, the film or song or whatever. It's about the whole journey, the influences, who you work with along the way.
Absolutely. It's like we've been tracing Baena's creative path, right? From those early days learning from Zemeckis and O. Russell to finding his own style with Joshi, then blending that with Plaza's energy in those collaborations. You realize every artist is like this mix of everything they've experienced woven together.
And the cool thing is with Baena, his story isn't really over.
Yeah.
People are still going to watch his films, discover them for the first time. That impact, it keeps going.
It reminds you that art doesn't just disappear, even if the artist is gone. And in the Baena's case, he left behind this collection of work that's both entertaining and makes you think. He wanted to make people laugh, but he also wanted them to think a little.
That's a powerful combo. It's like he was saying, hey, life's messy, it's complicated, but we can still find the humor in it, even when things are tough. And that message, it's going to stick with people, especially those who really connect with his style of comedy.
And speaking of connections, it makes me think about those creative partnerships we talked about earlier, the ones that just spark something special. You know, the Coen brothers, Tim Burton and Johnny Depp, Lennon and McCartney. What gets me is how those duos often achieve more than you'd expect just by adding up their individual talents.
Like some kind of alchemy happens. 1 + 1 = 3, or 10 even. And it's not always predictable, right? You can't just put two talented people together and assume it'll work. It's about chemistry, shared goals, a willingness to push each other.
Exactly. That's what we saw with Baena and Plaza. They each brought something to the table, but together they created something totally new. Their films have this energy, this mix of humor and pathos that's unique to them.
And that's what makes their partnership so interesting. It's not just about being funny. It's about using comedy to look at the human experience, to find those honest moments within all the absurdity.
It's a legacy worth celebrating, for sure. It reminds us that collaboration can be this incredible force, that having the right creative partner can take your work to a whole other level.
So to wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a little something to think about. Consider the people you collaborate with, whether it's at work, in your hobbies, even in your personal life. What makes those partnerships special? What do you create together that wouldn't exist otherwise? And what can you learn from duos like Baena and Plaza, those who figured out how to make each other better, how to create something truly remarkable?
It's a question worth asking ourselves, because in the end, we're all connected, and the stories we tell, the art we make, the collaborations we build, they all become part of that bigger human experience.
And with that, we'll leave you to explore those connections. to find those moments of creative spark, and to keep diving deep into the world of art, film, and what it means to be human.